Hello there, my name is Paul the Star Wars Guy, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And welcome to the continuation of my series of reviewing every single Star Wars movie that has come out. Today's review is about The Force Awakens. As always, I'll be giving two different perspectives on this movie, what I thought of it the first time I saw it, and what I think of it now. So make sure to hit like and subscribe, and wasting no more time, let's get right into it. So, this was the first Star Wars movie I had ever seen in the theaters when it first released. I was in the Navy serving overseas in Bahrain at the time, and I don't think I had ever been any more hyped for a movie before this, nor really have been hyped for a movie like this since, because this was the first piece of live action Star Wars content we had ever gotten since Revenge of the Sith. I saw every trailer leading up to this movie and even watched the first season of Rebels just to gauge how Disney was going to be handling Lucasfilm now that they were in charge. And I'll give my opinions on Rebels at another time. But I remember seeing this the very first day it released in Bahrain in the theaters. I was watching it with one of my supervisors from the Navy and one of his friends. And when I saw it the first time, I thought it was a good movie. Though I remember leaving the theater and something felt off about the movie. And it was two things distinctly. It was that number one, just calling a spade here, it was very much a retelling of A New Hope, but with some of the characters swapped around. And number two, I noticed that there was a certain, if you will, spirit of George Lucas that was missing from this movie that was present with episodes 1 through 6. Go back and watch episodes 1 through 6 and they'll have very similar feel to them in the way that the story is told and the dialogue, for better or worse, is written. And this just was not present with The Force Awakens nor anything since. Though at the time I told myself, all right, Paul, just get used to it. George Lucas is not going to be making any more Star Wars. This is the way things are going to be now. So I watched the movie as often as I could and as much as I could afford for as long as it was in the theaters in Bahrain. I even saw it on an on flight movie when I was flying back to Bahrain from being home on leave. So I will admit that I kind of wore myself out on this movie and did the movie did kind of get old to me because of that. And then The Last Jedi came out and I'll talk about that movie in like two videos from now, so we'll get into more detail about that. But just for now, know that The Last Jedi, because of what was in it, did make me lose a lot of love for The Force Awakens. And then The Rise of Skywalker came out, and overall, let's just say that the sequel trilogy is not my favorite. None of the sequel trilogy movies are my favorite Star Wars movie. But looking at The Force Awakens by itself, I just got done watching it while making this movie, and I still think that by itself it's a decently good movie and it gets the job done as far as Star Wars goes. Now, it's no by no means my favorite, but it's not that bad either. So, let's get into it. Like I said, this is a retelling of A New Hope. Sure, the characters may have different names, and some of the locations may be different, and how they get there may be different. But the major ideas that were part of A New Hope are also part of this movie. You have the droid that has very vital information that both the rebels, in this case the Resistance, and the Empire, or the First Order, both sides want that droid. The droid is lost on a desert planet and gets found by someone living in very humble means on this desert planet, in this case, Rey. Rey ends up getting a ride off the desert planet on the Millennium Falcon, where she meets, of course, Han Solo and Chewbacca. Except in this case, because he's older, Han Solo is the stand in for old Ben Kenobi as the wise mentor. Han and Chewie take Rey and the droid and Finn, a defecting stormtrooper, to a very seedy cantina to look for passage to get back to the Resistance. And then some other events, which we'll go over later. We get Kylo Ren, who is the stand in for Vader, who ends up killing the wise mentor, where the wise mentor sacrifices himself so that Rey and Finn and Chewie and BB 8 can get away. And then, of course, we have the big climactic lightsaber fight. And then we sort of lead into where Empire went, with Rey going to a distant, remote planet to learn from a wise Jedi Master, this time Luke. So, being a retelling of A New Hope, does it tell A New Hope well? And I think it does an okay job at it. I think at best it's a good tribute act. And I can kind of understand why they chose to tell the story this way. Because let's face it, as much as people say that the sequel trilogy has divided the fan base, the prequels started it. And Disney wanted to try and unite the fan base with their new movies, so they wanted to play it safe. So they decided to make a story that fans were familiar with and swap around the characters and swap around a couple different parts of the story just to make it new. And I think at the time that The Force Awakens came out, it kind of worked. People were all excited about The Force Awakens. People were all excited for Rey. They wanted to find out who she was related to, how she was able to use the Force. They were wondering who Kylo Ren was. Well, we knew who Kylo Ren was. He was, of course, Han's son. But they were wondering who Snoke was. They were wondering what Luke was going to teach Rey after this. And we'll get all into all of that in The Last Jedi. But let's move off of the story now and talk about the characters. And we'll start, of course, with Rey. And this is where I'm going to revisit my hero's journey analogy that I came up with for the original trilogy and for the prequels. So, again, just a quick refresher. The hero's journey basically tells the story of a hero who starts in a very humble place, but is called upon for this grand adventure to ultimately defeat evil. And along the way, the hero will meet this wise old mentor to teach them how to be a hero, basically. Along the way, the hero will be tempted and tested and will stumble but pick themselves back up and ultimately go on to defeat the great evil and bring peace. So, this movie, much like A New Hope was the start of the hero's journey for Rey. Now, before I go any further, let's address whether let's address the idea of Rey being a Mary Sue. Now, for those that are not familiar, a Mary Sue is basically a female character written intentionally to be completely flawless. She can do no wrong. Everyone loves her. She's good at everything. And when she dies, she is basically mourned by everyone. In fact, if I remember correctly, this came from like a parody of a Star Trek fanfic where the main character was literally named Mary Sue, and she was this perfect character that everyone loved. And ever since then, anytime that a character similar to that has come about, they've been called a Mary Sue. And that is a label that's been given to Rey thanks to basically the sequel trilogy as a whole. But looking at just The Force Awakens, is Rey a Mary Sue in this movie? Well, let's break down what she does, and then we'll come to the answer at the end. And to be fair, I am going to somewhat be playing devil's advocate here. So, when we first meet Rey, she's just a scavenger, making a life out of pulling parts out of old star destroyers and X-wings and selling them for food. You know, what anyone else would be doing on a planet like Jakku. But the first time we see her doing something beyond what she normally does on a day is pilot the Millennium Falcon, that she said that she has never piloted before, but she has flown ships. She says that. And she takes off in the Falcon with Finn, of course, in the gunner's position. And after I think about 5 or 10 minutes of very rough piloting on the Falcon, basically dragging it along the dirt, she, gets the hang of it and starts piloting it the same as Han Solo would. That there is believable enough to me. But the part that I think is very, very unbelievable is when they're flying out of the Star Destroyer. Pretend my phone here is the Falcon. Very low budget show. So the Falcon is flying out of the wreckage of the Star Destroyer. The gun position, which Finn is, my little grip thing here, is pointed straight down, and they got a TIE fighter on their tail. So they fly out, and Rey intentionally shuts off the engines and makes the Falcon flip over like this, so that the gun can shoot at the TIE fighter, and then they're in free fall while they're doing this, but in the last section they fly away. That seemed a little bit out there for me, but I let it go at the time. And then the next thing we notice of Rey possibly being a Mary Sue is when she's able to, seemingly out of nowhere, start using the Force. Pretty much from the moment that she first touches Luke's lightsaber to the end of the movie, she's doing things that she didn't know that she could do, yet somehow she thought to do them. For example, pulling the Jedi mind trick on the stormtrooper, or using the Force to pull Luke's lightsaber back to her and draw on the Force to ultimately win the lightsaber fight against Kylo Ren. People have pointed to those as her being evidence of being a Mary Sue, and I can certainly see where they're coming from. Though in this movie, when I first saw it, I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, because I thought The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker would provide a little bit more insight as to why she was able to do that stuff seemingly out of nowhere. Again, we'll get into those movies later. So I would say in this movie, is Rey a Mary Sue? Excuse me. She is very gifted, I will say, but I don't think she quite reached the levels of Mary Sue, at least for me, in this movie. So those are my thoughts on Rey. Now let's talk about Finn. Also, real quick before I go on, all the casting I thought was just as good in this movie as the other 6 movies. Everyone, with what they were given, played their part very well. Now, Finn. Finn, this was by far Finn's best movie of the sequel trilogy. And again, talking about, I, I'll try and keep this movie separate, but it's kind of hard to talk about this movie without mentioning The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, but I'll do my best. Finn, of course, has a story arc that we really didn't see in the other 6 movies, where he starts out as a bad guy, as a stormtrooper, but when it comes time to actually pull the trigger on innocent civilians, he finds that he just can't do it, and he decides that he's done with being a stormtrooper, and he defects, escaping with Poe, who, of course, is the Han Solo stand-in, played by Oscar Isaac. And they both crash land on Jakku, where Finn meets Rey, and lies that he is part of the Resistance. So I think John Boyega did that very well. I think Finn had an interesting story in this movie, though personally, I would have held off on him turning good just a little bit more. I think it happened a little bit too soon in this movie for me. And then Poe, even though we don't see as much of him in this movie, we see that he is a very, very skilled pilot, especially in the fight on Takodana. and I think he did great in this movie. Um, Oscar Isaac did. And then talking about Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren is my favorite character of the sequel trilogy. And I think out of all of the casting of the new characters, Adam Driver was the best casting possible for Kylo Ren. I know I've said before that I couldn't imagine anyone but Mark Hamill playing Luke, anyone but Harrison Ford playing Han, anyone but James Earl Jones doing the voice of Vader. Well, same thing with Kylo Ren. I can't imagine anyone but Adam Driver being Kylo Ren. He did it very well. There was one thing though that I would do differently though with Kylo Ren. Keep the crossguard saber because I think that's a pretty unique thing for him, and I like how it's a very very distorted and unstable blade. Keep the design of the mask, but I would not have had him take off his mask in front of Rey in that torture chamber only to put it back on to take it off again for his father. I would have done one of two things for this. I would have either A had him take it off in front of Rey in the torture chamber and not put it on again the rest of the movie, or I would have had him keep the helmet on in front of Rey and not take it off until his father sees him, and then he keeps it off for the rest of the movie. But other than that, that's really the only problem I have with Kylo Ren. I thought they presented him very well in this movie. So that's enough talking about the brand new. Actually, there is one other character, and that's General Hux. There's really not much I have to say about him in this movie. I thought Domhnall Gleeson, if I said his name right, did a good job with him. It's and again, I think that this is the best of General Hux that we would see in the entire trilogy, though his big speech on the Star Killer base was very hilarious, unintentionally, of course. So that's all that I can think of to talk about with the new characters. So let's talk about the old returning characters, starting with Han and Chewie, and especially Han. So first off, it was great seeing Harrison Ford back as Han Solo alongside Chewie, who I think in this movie was played by Peter Mayhew. Um, but I was a little bit disappointed to see that he and Leia essentially had broken up. I wanted to see more of Han and Leia together and see them actually raise, their son Kylo Ren, or as he would be in this movie, Ben Solo. I didn't really want to see Han go back to his life as a smuggler, back to a life where he's swindling people out of their money and has racked up too many debts that he can pay back, and now people want to kill him again. But that being said, I think that, you know, the way that Harrison Ford portrayed this character, I think, with what he was given, he did a good job. And speaking of Han Solo, let's talk about his death scene. Yes, of course, Han Solo does die in this movie, and I'm not even kidding here. I think this is the best scene in the movie as far as how it was made and how it was set up, where you have Han approaching his son, Kylo Ren, out on this long bridge with an army of stormtroopers as well as Finn, Rey, and Chewie as an audience. And they have that conversation where Han knows that Kylo Ren is not going to return home, but Han's his father. He's got to try anyway, at least for Leia's sake. And he does try to convince Ben to come home, and you do see that to a certain degree Ben does want to come home, but he also knows that he's committed his life now to the First Order, and he still has this hatred for the Jedi and for what Han must have been like as a father to him. And then we see, of course, Kylo Ren ignite the lightsaber right through Han Solo's chest. And I saw a theory about this once, talking about how allegedly it wasn't even Kylo Ren that pushed the button to ignite the saber, it was Han. but I don't necessarily know if I believe that because you do see a little bit of a thrust forward when Kylo Ren ignites his saber. So I think that Kylo Ren did actually kill Han. He didn't just hold the lightsaber and let Han push the button. I think that was intentional by Kylo Ren. And then Chewie, of course, is Chewie. And then moving on to Leia. Leia, I was also disappointed. I think Carrie Fisher did great with what she was given, but I personally was disappointed that we didn't see her as a Jedi Master the same as Luke, that she was just basically Leia, albeit General Leia this time instead of Princess Leia. But even still, just seeing Princess Leia again, especially the scene that she had together with Han, were very nice to see. And then, of course, seeing C3PO and R2D2 were cool. Also, speaking of droids, I thought BB-8, even though he had a bit of a goofy design at first, I thought BB-8 was harmless in this movie. And then finally, Luke. Now, there's really not much to say here about Luke, considering he doesn't even say anything in this movie, and you don't see him for like the last minutes of the movie. But I will say that the little bit that we do get to see of Luke in this movie, J.J. Abrams did a good job of presenting Luke as this very mystical being that Rey has just approached on this mountaintop, and this aura of power and mystery to him, where you wonder what he's going to say next, to having his old lightsaber, his father's lightsaber, handed back to him. Again, something that I was looking forward to seeing how that would turn out in the next movie, which, again, we will talk about that later. And then finally, let's talk about other aspects of the movie. So, I thought the action in this movie was decent enough. I thought the ship battles were pretty good, even if again it was basically a rerun of destroying the Death Star, basically a Star Killer base at this time, except it's bigger now. It's a planet, not just a little moon-sized thing. And the lightsaber fights in this, I thought were okay, but this was another attempt, I believe, at trying to go back to basics instead of the very flashy style that the prequels had that some people criticized. Me personally being a fan of the prequels style of lightsaber fights, even though episode 6 is my favorite, I thought this was a very big step backwards in progress to take the fight back to this um, more raw, aggressive, more emotional style instead of what we had come to know from the prequels. But from a story standpoint, it kind of makes sense because really, Rey and Kylo Ren in this movie specifically were not completed in their training. Heck, Rey was not trained at all. And Kylo Ren was nursing a very gnarly hip injury thanks to Chewie's bowcaster. So in this movie, it kind of made sense that the action was not nearly as flashy as the prequels. And I still think that it did the job. And it was kind of cool seeing the trees around them get cut down as collateral damage in the lightsaber fight, which is not really something we see that, which is especially in the prequels, not really something we saw as much of, just seeing the area around them getting destroyed. The most the closest thing that I could think of to this was in Obi-Wan versus Anakin, where they both are striking down on each other's sabers and they accidentally hit a panel on right next to them, which causes, of course, the shields protecting everything from the lava to turn off. But overall, what I think of The Force Awakens now by itself, I think it's an okay to good movie. And that's really it for my thoughts on The Force Awakens. So thank you guys for watching this video. Again, hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I hope to see you guys on my next video, which I will be talking about Rogue One. Thank you very much.